There is a moment in every person's life when the ground disappears beneath their feet, and the only question that remains is whether anyone will reach down to pull them back up. Logan Hayes thought he had already survived the worst thing a man could survive. He was wrong, and Sophia Blackwood thought she had built walls strong enough to keep the world out forever. She was wrong too. What happens when a man who has stopped believing in tomorrow meets a woman who has never allowed herself to want one? Drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. The coffee had gone cold again. Logan noticed it the way he noticed most things these days. Too late and without much energy to do anything about it. He wrapped both hands around the mug anyway, more out of habit than hope, and stared through the kitchen window at the backyard where the grass had gotten too long again. He kept meaning to mow it on Saturday mornings. He kept meaning to do a lot of things. The clock above the stove read 6:47 a.m. He had 13 minutes. "Daddy?" The voice came from the hallway, still thick with sleep. "Daddy, I can't find my left shoe." Logan pushed back from the counter and turned. His daughter Mia stood in the doorway wearing her school uniform, the white shirt already slightly untucked, with one blue sneaker on and one white sock dangling off the end of her foot like a surrender flag. "It's probably under your bed again," he said. "I looked." "So, did you actually look? Or did you stand at the door and kind of squint at it?" Mia made the face that meant he had correctly diagnosed the situation. She was 6 years old and already had the expressive range of a seasoned actress. Sometimes Logan looked at her and felt something that had no clean name, a kind of bruised gratitude, love wrapped around something that still ached. "Go look properly," he said. "I'll make your toast." She disappeared back down the hallway with heavy, theatrical footsteps, and Logan pulled 2 slices of bread from the bag and dropped them in the toaster. He moved around the small kitchen on autopilot, butter from the fridge, the slightly too sharp knife she liked because it spread evenly, her orange juice in the purple cup. The purple cup was non-negotiable. He had learned that on a morning 6 months ago that he preferred not to revisit. This was his life at 32. He did not say that to himself with bitterness, exactly. More with a kind of flat acknowledgement, the way you'd note that the weather had turned. It was what it was. He worked 4 days a week doing facilities management for a mid-sized commercial property company downtown. Not the career he'd once imagined, but steady, and the hours were manageable enough that he could do pickup at 3:15 without burning vacation days. On the 5th day, he handled the accumulated wreckage of everything else: laundry, groceries, the slow disaster of the apartment, the stack of bills he sorted in order of urgency and paid in order of catastrophe. He was not unhappy, but he was not much of anything else either. The toaster popped. Logan caught both slices before they bounced off the counter, a small domestic skill he was unreasonably proud of, and was spreading butter when Mia reappeared in the doorway, both shoes on, one of them on the wrong foot. "Found it," she announced. "Left shoe on the right foot," he said without looking up. Silence. The sound of a small body sitting on the floor and performing emergency footwear correction. "How did you even know?" "I'm your dad. Sit down and eat your toast." She climbed onto her chair and accepted the plate with the serious focus of a person conducting an important review. She was missing a front tooth, had been for 3 weeks now, and the resulting gap gave her speech a faint, charming whistle on certain words. Logan had taken approximately 200 photographs of that gap. He would be genuinely, irrationally sad when the adult tooth came through. "Ms. Patterson says we're doing the spring project this week," Mia said, taking a bite. "Yeah? What's the project?" "We have to interview someone in our family about their job." She chewed thoughtfully. "What's your job called again?" "Facilities manager." She made a small sound that suggested this was not going to make for a thrilling interview. "I know," Logan said. "We can make it sound better. I'll help you." "Maybe I could say you're an engineer. I mean, that's not exactly wrong." This seemed to satisfy her. She ate the rest of her toast quickly and efficiently, while Logan rinsed his cold coffee down the sink and poured it out, a small daily funeral he performed without ceremony. He packed her backpack, reading folder, snack, water bottle, and handed it over at the door. "Hat," he said. "It's not sunny." "It will be by lunch." She took the hat with an expression of profound injustice and jammed it on her head at an angle that communicated her feelings clearly. They walked the 6 blocks to school the way they always walked them. Mia providing running commentary on everything she observed, Logan listening with about 60% of his attention while the remaining 40 cataloged the day ahead. He had a site inspection at 9, a call with the contracts team at 11, and a stack of maintenance reports that had been breeding on his desk for 2 weeks. After pickup, he needed to stop at the grocery store because they were out of milk, and the pasta situation had become concerning. At the school gate, Mia stopped and turned with the abruptness of someone who had just remembered something critical. "Daddy." "Yeah." "You should go on more dates." Logan blinked. "What?" "Mrs. Kim next door told Mrs. Okafor that you work too much and you need a girlfriend." Mia delivered this with the cheerful neutrality of a news anchor. "I heard her through the window." "You were eavesdropping on the neighbors." "I was sitting on the windowsill. It's different." Logan crouched down to her level, partly to fix the hat she'd already tilted sideways again, partly to buy himself 2 seconds to figure out how to respond to that. Mia watched him with bright, patient eyes. "Mrs. Kim is very kind," he said carefully, "but that's not really her business. Don't you want a girlfriend? I want you to get to class before the bell rings." She gave him the look that meant she knew he was deflecting. 6 years old, and already she could read him like a book he'd written himself. But she accepted the redirection with grace. She kissed his cheek, turned, and jogged through the gate without looking back, backpack bouncing. Logan stood there for a moment after she disappeared through the door. He straightened up, shoved his hands in his jacket pockets, and started the walk back to the train station. The truth was, dating had not even occurred to him as a serious category of life for a long time. Not since Ellen. He turned away from that thought the way you'd turn away from a bright light. Not with drama, just with the practiced reflex of someone who knew better than to look directly at certain things. Ellen had been gone for 4 years. Mia had been 2. Logan had spent the first year in a fog so thick he still could not account for large portions of it. A fog of grief and practical survival, of learning to be a parent without a partner, of learning to fold a child's laundry and remember pediatric appointments and cook meals that were not entirely beige. The second year had been marginally better. The third, he had found something like rhythm. By the fourth, the rhythm had become routine, and routine had become the entire geography of his life. He worked. He raised his daughter. He slept 6 hours on a good night. On Sundays, he called his mother in Portland, who always ended the call by saying he sounded tired, which he always was. This was not nothing. He knew it was not nothing. But there were evenings, late ones after Mia was asleep and the apartment had gone quiet, when he sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on and felt the particular weight of a silence that no amount of productivity could fill. He'd started working on the energy project during those hours. Initially, it was just something to do with his hands, his mind. A problem to solve when there were no more dishes to wash and nothing on television worth watching. It had grown into something else entirely, but he hadn't let himself think too hard about what. Well, Sophia Blackwood's morning had started at 4:15, as it always did. By the time Logan was making Mia's toast, Sophia had already cleared 40 minutes on the Peloton, reviewed overnight reports from the Singapore office, responded to 14 emails, and was sitting in the back of a car moving through downtown traffic with a second espresso and a tablet showing draft contract language that her legal team had sent over at midnight. The contract was for an acquisition, a mid-sized logistics company she'd been pursuing for 11 months. The deal was nearly done. There were 3 outstanding clauses, 2 of which her general counsel believed were minor, and 1 of which Sophia believed was a potential liability the size of a small building. She had flagged it. Legal had flagged it back with a note suggesting the concern was manageable. She had flagged it a second time. This was essentially how all her mornings went. "Ms. Blackwood," her driver, James, glanced in the rearview mirror. 45 minutes to your first meeting, accounting for current traffic." "Thank you." "You should eat something." Sophia looked up from the tablet. "James, you've had 2 espressos." "I'm aware." "I'm just saying Dr. Reyes mentioned—" "James." She said it once more, quiet and clear, and he returned his eyes to the road. She went back to the contract. The thing people consistently misunderstood about Sophia Blackwood. People who read profiles of her in business magazines. People who competed against her in boardrooms. People who had gone to dinner with her exactly once and then told mutual acquaintances she was brilliant but cold, was that she was not cold. She had simply learned, early and thoroughly, that warmth cost more than it was worth in the world she operated in. Every room she walked into, someone was measuring her. Every decision she made, someone was looking for evidence that she'd been soft, hasty, emotional. She had built Blackwood Group from a $30 million inheritance into a $2 billion empire, not by being soft or hasty, but by being precise, rigorous, and 11 steps ahead of everyone who had ever underestimated her. She was 30 years old. She had been on the covers of 3 business publications in the last 18 months. She had a penthouse apartment she slept 6 hours in per night, a personal assistant who kept her calendar with military discipline, and a staff of 400 who respected her in the particular careful way that people respect someone who never visibly makes mistakes. She could not remember the last time she had laughed until it hurt. She was not sure lately that she had laughed at all. The car stopped at a light, and Sophia looked up from the tablet for a moment, without meaning to. A woman on the sidewalk was crouching next to a small boy who appeared to have tripped. She was checking his knee, saying something, and the boy's face went from crumpled almost tears to a reluctant smile in about 4 seconds. The woman stood up, took his hand, and they walked on. The light changed. Sophia went back to the contract. The collapse happened 3 weeks later, and it happened in the most undramatic way possible. She was in back-to-back meetings from 8 in the morning. The 4th meeting, an internal strategy review that should have taken 90 minutes and had stretched to 3 hours, ended at 2 in the afternoon, and she stood up from the conference table and the room tilted. Not dramatically, not like the movies, more like a slow, quiet wrongness, a disconnection between her body and the floor beneath it. Her assistant, Dana, was at her elbow before she fully registered sitting back down. "I'm fine," Sophia said, which was not accurate. "You're not fine," Dana said, which was the sort of thing Dana occasionally allowed herself to say, because she had worked for Sophia for 4 years and had correctly assessed that Sophia would occasionally tolerate honesty from precisely one source. "You look like a piece of paper." "Thank you, Dana. That's very helpful." "When did you last eat a real meal?" Sophia tried to remember. Lunch yesterday had been a protein bar at her desk. Dinner the night before had been, she genuinely could not reconstruct it, coffee, some crackers. She had been working until 2 in the morning on the Singapore acquisition. "Recently," she said. Dana's expression indicated she found this unconvincing. By 4 o'clock, Sophia was in her doctor's office, which she had not entered willingly, but had been driven to by Dana invoking a phrase Sophia had once said during a moment of unguarded exhaustion. "If I ever actually fall down, you have my permission to drag me somewhere." And Dana had kept that in reserve for 11 months, waiting. Dr. Reyes was 53, blunt, and completely unimpressed by Sophia's net worth, which was one of the things Sophia had always respected about her. "Your blood pressure is elevated," she said, reviewing the numbers. "Your cortisol is through the roof. Your iron is low, your vitamin D is basically decorative, and you've lost 4 pounds since I saw you in November." She set the tablet down. "How many hours are you sleeping?" 5 to 6. "Per night?" "Yes." "And stress management?" "I'm managing." "Sophia." Dr. Reyes looked at her directly. "I'm not talking about your workload right now. I'm talking about your body, which is a separate thing from your company and which will not respond to a strongly worded email. You are 30 years old, and you have the physiological stress profile of a 50-year-old who has been running a marathon on bad shoes." She paused. "I want you to take 2 weeks." Sophia stared at her. 2 weeks. Off. Away from the office. With actual sleep and actual food and something resembling human contact that is not an earnings call. I know what you have. I'm telling you what your body has." Dr. Reyes let that sit for a moment. "You came in here because something scared you. That thing in the conference room. That was a warning. I've seen that warning before. I want you to take it seriously." Sophia drove home in silence. James said nothing, which was the correct instinct. She stood in her penthouse at 7 o'clock in the evening, which was usually when her second wind started, and she'd pour herself a glass of water and open her laptop. The city spread out through the floor-to-ceiling windows, brilliant and enormous and completely indifferent to her. The apartment was beautiful. She had not particularly chosen it. A designer had chosen it based on her specifications: clean lines, minimal clutter, nothing requiring maintenance. It was efficient and tasteful and entirely impersonal. She sat down on the couch. She couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on the couch before 10 and did not open her laptop. She sat there for 45 minutes, listening to the city. The thing that was getting to her, the thing she couldn't quite route around with logic or productivity, was the question Dana had asked 3 months ago and which had apparently been slowly burrowing into her since. Dana had asked it during a late evening, in an offhand way, not meaning to open anything. Is there anyone you'd actually want to call right now? It had been a throwaway. Dana had been talking about something practical, emergency contacts, some updated form, but the question had landed somewhere inconvenient. Sophia had mentally scrolled through her phone. She had business contacts by the dozen, acquaintances she occasionally had dinner with when a social appearance was strategically useful, a few people from her MBA program she exchanged brief messages with at holidays, her father, with whom she had a relationship that was functional and affectionate in the way of two people who love each other but have never quite known how to say it. But someone to actually call. Someone who would pick up without an agenda, who would listen without measuring, who did not need anything from her and would not carefully bank anything she said for later use. She had come up blank. She sat in her clean, efficient, impersonal apartment and understood with sudden and unwelcome clarity that she had been so focused on building a world no one could take from her that she had somehow neglected to put any people in it. The blind date was Dana's idea, offered with the cheerful persistence that characterized all of Dana's worst ideas. Absolutely not, Sophia said, when it was first proposed. My cousin says he's… Dana, just one dinner. He doesn't know who you are. I specifically told Marcus not to tell him. He thinks you work in finance. I said mid-level finance. Sophia looked up from her laptop. You told him I was mid-level finance. So you'd have a normal conversation. I have normal conversations. Dana's expression said, I've worked for you for 4 years and I would not describe any of them that way. One dinner, Dana said. If you hate it, I will never mention it again, and I will also bring you a ceremonial apology coffee every morning for 2 weeks. Oat milk. Obviously. Sophia went on a Thursday evening in late March, mostly because saying no to the same thing 4 times in 2 weeks started to feel like it was costing her more energy than just going. She told herself it was transactional. She would have dinner, be pleasant, and go home. She wore the gray dress that people always described as understated, which was her version of camouflage, noticeable enough to be appropriate, quiet enough not to broadcast. The restaurant was a mid-range Italian place in the West Village that she would not have chosen herself. Warm lighting, tables close enough together, the smell of garlic, and something baking. Not her environment. He was already there when she arrived, which surprised her slightly. She was 7 minutes early, and she had expected to wait. He was standing up when she came in, already spotted by the host, and for a moment before he saw her, she had a second to just observe. Medium height, solidly built, but not ostentatiously so, a jacket that had been pressed but not recently. Dark hair, slightly longer than neat. He had the look of someone who had made an effort but was slightly uncertain whether the effort had landed, and that uncertainty was oddly, she noted it and didn't quite know what to do with it. Humanizing. He saw her and his expression went through a sequence she caught. Assessment, slight surprise, and then a visible recalibration into something that was less performance and more straightforward. Logan Hayes, he said, extending a hand. Sophia. She took it. He had the handshake of someone who worked with their hands sometimes. Sorry. Am I late? I was early. I'm always early. It's a thing. He said it with enough self-awareness that it didn't come across as a brag. I stress-checked the train times 4 times. She sat down, and he sat down, and for a moment there was the particular awkward beat of 2 strangers trying to recalibrate from setup to actual human interaction. So, Logan said, picking up the menu, I was told you're in finance. I'm going to be upfront that I don't really know how to make small talk about finance. That's fine, Sophia said. I'm not going to talk about finance. He glanced up. What are you going to talk about? I don't know yet. She scanned the menu. What do you actually want to order? Not what seems appropriate. What do you actually want? He looked at her for a moment like he was trying to figure out if that was a test. Then, honestly, the carbonara. It's the most expensive pasta on the menu, and I feel weird ordering it on a first date because it seems like I'm assuming someone else is paying, but it's also what I want. Sophia almost smiled. Get the carbonara. What are you getting? The gnocchi. It's what I want. He laughed, a short, real sound, and she found herself slightly thrown by it. It was not a performing laugh. It was just a laugh. Okay, he said. This might actually be all right. The conversation that followed was not what she'd expected. Logan asked her questions, real ones, not the flattering kind designed to get her talking about her own impressiveness, but the kind that seemed genuinely curious. What did she find hard about her work? Not challenging in the good way. Hard. He made the distinction himself, leaning forward slightly, and she realized with a small jolt that no one had asked her that in a very long time. She gave him half an answer. The honest half. The part that had nothing to do with market positioning. In return, he told her about Mia. Not in the way single fathers sometimes talked about their children in early dating contexts. Strategically, as a character reference, a proof of depth. He talked about Mia the way someone talks about the organizing fact of their existence. Mia had said this at breakfast. Mia had a theory about why birds flew south that she'd explained at length and which had been scientifically questionable but philosophically hard to argue with. Mia had lost a tooth and was negotiating aggressively with the tooth fairy about the going rate. She sounds like a lot, Sophia said. She's everything, Logan said simply. And then, seeming to hear how that might sound, that probably comes across as, no, Sophia said. It doesn't. They stayed at the restaurant for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She knew because she checked her watch at some point and was genuinely surprised. She never stayed anywhere for 2 hours and 40 minutes unless she was in a meeting. Outside afterward, on the sidewalk, there was a moment. The particular kind of moment where both people are aware something slightly unexpected has happened and are trying to figure out what to do with it. This was good, Logan said. It was, she agreed. I wasn't expecting it to be. Neither was I. He glanced down the street for a cab, then back at her. He had the expression of someone who was weighing whether to say the thing he was thinking. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. The finance thing Donna's cousin told me. How mid-level actually is it? Sophia looked at him for a moment. Not very, she said. He absorbed this, processed it. How not very? Blackwood Group. She watched him work through the name. She could see the exact moment it connected. Not with the flash of calculation she was used to seeing when people made that connection, the quick mental arithmetic of what it meant and what it could mean for them. Just a look of slight bemusement, followed, unexpectedly, by something that might have been amusement. Huh, he said. Huh? I ordered the carbonara on a date with a billionaire. He shook his head, not unkindly. I really should have stress-tested the economics of that more carefully. She laughed. It surprised her. It was the kind of laugh that came from the chest, rather than the social portion of the brain. And it had been so long since she'd done that it felt almost unfamiliar, like a muscle she'd let atrophy. Good night, Logan, she said. Good night, Sophia. She got in the car and James pulled into traffic, and she sat looking out the window at the city with a feeling she couldn't quite name, light, almost. Not happy, exactly, but lighter than she'd been in months. She did not expect to see him again. 3 days later, she called Dana into her office. Get me Logan Hayes' number. Dana, who had the composure of a person who had been waiting for this exact sentence for 3 days, said, I'll have it in 5 minutes, and left without celebrating, which was professional and impressive. Logan picked up on the third ring, which she found inexplicably reassuring. I thought you might want to see the park near the school, Sophia said, which was a lie. She didn't even know what park she was referring to, and then caught herself. That came out wrong. I wanted to know if you wanted to get coffee. A pause. It's 11 on a Wednesday, he said. I'm aware. Don't you have 17 things I'm canceling? Do you want coffee or not? Another pause. Shorter. She could hear what might have been a small smile. Yeah, Logan said. I want coffee. The coffee became a habit before either of them named it. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the place on Mercer Street, 45 minutes before Logan's first work call. Sophia arrived with her phone face down on the table, which had cost her a genuine effort the first 3 times. And then, somewhere around week 3, had started to feel less like deprivation and more like relief. They talked. Not about business, not hers, not at first. They talked about Mia, who had now been promoted from a mentioned character to a recurring subject of something that felt almost like joint parental concern, despite the obvious absurdity of that framing. They talked about Logan's childhood in Ohio, his mother's terrible cooking, and how he'd learned to feed himself out of self-preservation. The way he'd stumbled into facilities management through a series of lateral moves he couldn't quite reconstruct in a way that made narrative sense. They talked about Sophia's father, who had started the company and handed it to her at 25, and then spent the next 5 years watching to see if she'd manage it or ruin it, and how the watching had occasionally felt worse than the doubt. Logan listened in a way Sophia had started to identify as rare, not waiting for his turn, not cataloging what she said for later reference, just listening. You do this thing, he told her one Thursday, about a month in. What thing? When you're thinking through something complicated, you look at the table instead of wherever the conversational eye contact is supposed to go. And then you look up when you've actually worked something out. He shrugged, slightly self-conscious. I noticed. Sophia sat with that for a moment. Nobody's ever mentioned that before, she said. I'm around a lot of people who are performing paying attention, Logan said. You're different. I know you're not always great, he said, with the complete lack of ceremony that she had come to understand was his default mode. I wasn't giving you a compliment, just noting a thing. She found this unreasonably more affecting than any compliment. It was on a Tuesday in the 5th week, the 2nd Tuesday of April, she would remember later, that she stayed 20 minutes later than usual because she had asked him what he did in the evenings, after Mia was asleep, and he had paused in a way that was different from his usual thinking pause. I've been working on something, he said, careful. What kind of something? Another pause. She waited him out. An energy system, he said. Thermal differential conversion. It's basically a way to capture and convert ambient heat differential into usable electrical current. It's not new physics, but the configuration I've worked out, the efficiency ratios, the material combination. He stopped, looked at the table. It sounds like I'm just describing my hobby. It doesn't, Sophia said. How long have you been working on it? 2 years. Almost 3. He looked up. I work on it from about 10 to midnight most nights, after Mia's down. Sophia's mind was doing several things at once, running the math on what 2 years of late night hours on a single technical problem represented, parsing what he'd said about efficiency ratios and trying to place it in the landscape of what she knew about energy technology, and at the same time registering the particular quality of exposure in his face, the way he was watching her response, the way a person watches something they've been careful with. I'd like to see it, she said. He looked at her. You don't have to, Logan. She said it the way she occasionally said things, quiet but unambiguous. I'd like to see it. He chipped. He sent her the technical documents that evening. She was up until 2 in the morning reading them. She called her head of technology investment at 7 the next morning and said, I need you to look at something. By Friday afternoon, 2 senior members of her technical team had independently flagged the same thing. This wasn't hobbyist speculation. The theoretical framework was sound, and the efficiency projections, if they held up to prototype testing, were not incremental. They were paradigm shifting. She called Logan on Saturday morning. He was at the park with Mia. She could hear the background sounds of a playground sound. Children, something squeaking. Are you busy? She said, which was technically unnecessary but felt polite. Hold on. The sound of slightly hurried movement. Okay. What? My team looked at your documents. A long pause. You showed it to your team? 2 people I trust completely. She had done it without his explicit permission, and she knew it. I should have asked first, I'm sorry. Another pause, this one with a different texture. processing, not wounded. What did they say? Logan. She kept her voice even because this was real and she needed him to hear it as real and not as performance. This is serious. What you've built could change how entire industries manage energy consumption. I don't say that I'm not trying to flatter you into something. I mean it as a factual assessment. She could hear him breathing. In the background, Mia's voice asking something about the slide. Come to dinner, he said finally. Tonight. I'll cook, Mia will interrogate you, and we'll talk about it properly. I don't want to. I'm offering. Come. She arrived at 7 with wine she'd agonized over for longer than she would admit. She knew approximately nothing about what went with whatever Logan cooked, and stood in front of his apartment door for a slightly embarrassing 4 seconds before knocking. The apartment was small and not decorated with any particular intention, but it was very clean in the specific way of someone who kept things under control, because the alternative cost them something. There were crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, a bookshelf that held both engineering texts and picture books and no obvious organizational logic, a pair of tiny shoes by the door, one tipped over. Mia was already at the kitchen table doing something with colored pencils, and she looked up at Sophia with the frank appraisal of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to mask first impressions. You're the finance lady, Mia said. I am, Sophia agreed. Daddy says you're actually really important. He did? He also says I'm not supposed to say that. Mia glanced at Logan, who was at the stove with his back turned and his shoulders doing something that might have been suppressed laughter. I forgot. It's fine, Sophia said. She pulled out the chair across from Mia and sat down, which put them at approximately eye level. What are you drawing? Our building, but I made it taller. Mia held it up. I made it 500 floors. That's taller than any building that exists. I know. That's the point. Sophia looked at the drawing. The building was very tall and very crooked and had windows and no pattern that conformed to physics, and there were small figures in the windows doing various activities. It was objectively excellent. The people in the windows, Sophia said, are they real people? That's me. Mia pointed to a figure on floor 400 who appeared to be writing something. And that's Daddy. And that's Mrs. Kim from next door, but I made her look nicer because she's been weird lately. Logan came over with 2 plates, set them down, and looked at the drawing. Who's that one? He pointed to a figure near the top Mia hadn't identified. That's the friend I don't have yet. Mia said it with complete composure, like it was a perfectly sensible category. I leave space. The dinner was pasta. Good, straightforward pasta, clearly made from a recipe he'd made many times. Mia ate with efficient focus and contributed to the conversation in bursts, asking Sophia 3 questions in rapid succession about her job. What did she do all day? Was it boring? Did she have a big chair? Before returning to her drawing with equal efficiency. After Mia was put to bed, a process that took 35 minutes involved 2 negotiations and a story Logan told from memory. They sat at the kitchen table with the remnants of dinner and the technical documents spread between them. And they talked properly for the first time about what the project could become. I need a partner, Sophia said, finally, around 10 o'clock. Not a charity case, not a pet project, a partner. You bring the intellectual property, the design, and you continue leading the technical development. I bring the capital, the infrastructure, and the legal framework to protect it. Logan was quiet for a moment. His elbows were on the table, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug in a way that was becoming familiar to her, the way he held things when he was turning something over carefully. Why? He said. Because it's worth doing. That's the business reason. She held his gaze. Because I trust your integrity more than I trust most of the people I've worked with for years. And because... She stopped. Because? Because I've been building things alone for a long time, she said, and I'm tired of it. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked down at the documents between them. She couldn't quite read his expression, which was rare for her. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, you'll think about it? Okay, I'm in. He looked up. But I'm a partner, not a project. Yes, she said. That's what I said. He nodded once and picked up his coffee, and they sat at his small kitchen table in his small apartment with its crayon drawings and its engineering books and the sound of Mia breathing through the baby monitor he still kept. From habit, she guessed, or love, and planned the beginning of something neither of them entirely understood yet. Outside, the city went on doing what it did. Inside, something had shifted. Neither of them named it, not that night, but they both felt it. The quiet, alarming weight of something that had been put in motion, something that was no longer about contracts or capital or technology alone. Logan picked up one of the schematics and pointed to a line in the third diagram. "This part," he said. "Let me walk you through the thermal loop." She leaned forward and listened, and for the first time in longer than she could count, she was not thinking about what came next. She was just there. The partnership agreement took 11 days to finalize, which Logan's lawyer, a tired, methodical man named Gerald, who operated out of a one-room office in Midtown and had handled Logan's affairs since the apartment lease 3 years ago, described as unusually fast. Sophia's legal team had sent over an initial draft on a Monday morning that ran to 62 pages, and Gerald had called Logan that afternoon with a voice that communicated both professional diligence and mild existential vertigo. "This is a serious document," Gerald said. "I know. I want to make sure you know. The IP protections for your technology they're genuinely good. Better than I'd have drafted, honestly. But the equity structure and the decision-making clauses, we need to sit with those." "Okay, what concerns you?" "The provision that gives her final authority on commercialization decisions." Logan was quiet for a moment. He was standing in the kitchen, Mia asleep, the schematics spread on the table the way they always were. "What do you think I should push back on?" "I think you should push back on that one specifically. You need a veto on licensing. It's your invention." He pushed back on it. Sophia's team came back within 24 hours with modified language. She called him that evening, not to negotiate, but to explain why the original clause had been written the way it was. A protection against decision paralysis, not a power grab. And then listened while he explained why it still mattered to him regardless of the intent. "Add a joint approval requirement," she said. "Done," he said. That was how they worked, he was discovering. Not without friction, but through it. Directly, without the performance of conflict, and without the performance of easy agreement either. She didn't concede things to make him feel good. She conceded things when the argument was right. He respected that more than he knew how to say, so he didn't try. The agreement was signed on a Thursday evening, across his kitchen table, with Gerald present via video call and Dana hovering in the background of Sophia's screen. Afterward, Logan made coffee, and Sophia sat in his kitchen for an hour going through the project timeline she'd drafted. A real one, with milestones and resource allocations and 3 different risk scenarios, because that was how her mind worked, and she had apparently decided to stop performing casualness about it. "Prototype testing in 8 weeks, she said, tracing the line with one finger. "If the efficiency numbers hold, we move to a controlled pilot. I have a manufacturing facility in New Jersey that's currently underutilized. We can retrofit a section." 8 weeks is aggressive. "It is. Do you think the thermal loop is ready?" "The thermal loop is ready. I'm more concerned about the material interface at scale. What do you need?" He looked at the diagram. "Time and a proper lab, which I've never had." "You'll have it Monday." She said it the way she said things she'd already decided, not as a promise, but as a statement of upcoming fact. He looked up at her. She was still looking at the timeline, one elbow on his kitchen table, jacket off, her hair slightly less composed than it was at 9 in the morning. She had a pen tucked behind her ear. He had seen photographs of Sophia Blackwood in business publications, controlled, precise, giving nothing away. This version was different, more angular, more real. "You're already running 3 steps ahead," he said. She looked up. "Is that a problem?" "It's an observation." "I've been told I do that." "Does it bother you when someone points it out?" She considered the question with more genuine attention than it probably warranted. "Depends on why they're pointing it out." "I'm pointing it out because I need you to slow down enough to tell me what you're thinking when you skip the middle steps. I can't follow the logic if I can't see it." She held his gaze for a moment, and then, not with apology but with something that looked like recalibration, she pulled the timeline back toward her and started walking through it from the beginning, step by step, out loud. He listened, and it was good. "So, The lab Sophia provided was on the fourth floor of a Blackwood Group research facility in Lower Manhattan. A clean, well-resourced space that had most recently been used by a biotech team whose project had concluded 6 months earlier. Logan walked into it on a Monday morning and stood still for a moment in a way he hadn't allowed himself to show to anyone, because the feeling required a second to process. He had been working for nearly 3 years on a folding table in his kitchen, with second-hand equipment he'd sourced and modified and sometimes held together with cable ties. The logic in his head had always run ahead of the physical reality of what he could build with what he had. Walking into a space with proper equipment, with the kind of material interface tools that had existed only theoretically in his process until now, it was the kind of thing that had no appropriate reaction except silence. He set his bag down and got to work. The lab came with a research assistant named Priya, who was 26 and had a materials science background and an extremely efficient way of communicating that she was skeptical of the project's claims while simultaneously being intrigued enough to engage with full rigor. Logan appreciated this. He had not wanted someone who would be reverential. "The efficiency claim in your documentation," she said, on the second day. 43% conversion at differential gradients below 30 degrees. That's the part I keep coming back to. I know. The literature doesn't support that at those gradients. The literature is working with different material interfaces. He pulled up the schematics on the screen. The layering sequence here, this is where most conventional approaches lose efficiency. I'm doing something different at this step. She leaned in. He walked her through it. She was quiet for a long moment after, staring at the diagram. "Okay," she said finally, which was not concession but was, he understood, the beginning of actual engagement. They worked through the first prototype week with the systematic chaos of building something for the first time in a new space. Equipment that needed calibration. A material shipment that arrived with 2 components substituted without notice. A temperature regulation issue on the 3rd day that cost them half a day. Logan worked until 8 most evenings, then took the train home, picked up Mia from the neighbor who sat with her until he got back, fed her dinner, heard about her day. Ms. Patterson had done the spring project. Apparently Mia's description of Logan's work had been enthusiastic, if not entirely accurate, and put her to bed. Then he went back to his notes. The tiredness was a different quality than it had been before. It was the tiredness of someone moving towards something rather than simply running in place. He noticed it but did not examine it too closely. The way you don't examine an unexpected stroke of luck too directly in case the examination disturbs it. Sophia came to the lab twice in the first 2 weeks. Not to supervise, she was clear about that, almost pointedly clear, in a way that made Logan understand she had thought about the line between oversight and interference and was consciously staying on her side of it. She came to see the work. She asked good questions, the kind that required him to articulate things he'd been holding in shorthand, which was useful in ways he hadn't expected. She stood next to him at the bench and looked at the prototype assembly with genuine attention, not the performance of engagement that people occasionally put on in technical settings they didn't understand. "The material thickness here," she said, on her second visit, pointing to a section of the interface layer. "Is that by design?" "Compromise between thermal conductivity and structural integrity. I'm still optimizing." She nodded slowly. "What happens if it's thinner?" "More efficient, also more fragile." "Is there a middle point?" "That's what I'm trying to find." She looked at it for another moment, then stepped back. "Okay, what do you need that you don't have?" "More time with the new deposition equipment. Priya and I are sharing it, and there's a scheduling constraint." "I'll sort it." By the end of week 3, the first preliminary test results were in. Logan called Sophia at 11 o'clock at night because he couldn't wait until morning and had no one else who would understand what he was saying. She picked up on the second ring. "The efficiency numbers," he said without preamble. "They're holding." Silence on her end, but not the blank kind. "At scale?" she said. "At current prototype scale. It's not full scale yet. But the differential gradient performance is within 3% of the theoretical model." He heard himself and made himself slow down. "I know that doesn't—" "Logan?" Her voice was careful and steady. "I understand what that means." He sat down on the edge of his bed in the dark apartment, heart still moving faster than normal. Through the wall he could hear the faint sound of Mia sleeping. the small, occasional shifts of a child deep under. "I've been doing this for 3 years," he said, "by myself, at a table." "I know. I kept thinking I was probably wrong, about some part of it. I went over it so many times looking for where I was wrong." "You weren't wrong." He didn't say anything for a moment. There was something in his chest that was difficult to categorize. Not quite triumph, too complicated for that. Relief, maybe. The specific relief of a thing that had been uncertain for so long it had become a form of background suffering, and had just stopped. "Thank you," he said. He wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking her for. "Don't thank me," she said. "I just gave you the table. So is all." Six weeks into the project, Sophia's corporate world began making its presence felt in ways Logan hadn't anticipated. He understood, in the abstract, that Blackwood Group was a large and complex organization with internal politics he had no visibility into. Sophia had mentioned the board in passing. 12 members, a mix of longtime Blackwood loyalists and newer appointments made during a growth period 5 years ago. She spoke about them the way someone speaks about a structural feature they've learned to manage, not fondly, but with familiarity. What he hadn't understood, until it started happening, was the texture of it. It started with small things. An admin request, routed through 3 layers of bureaucracy to document the lab's resource usage more formally than Sophia had originally indicated would be necessary. A query from someone in the legal department asking for clarification on the IP agreement's scope. Not problematic, Dana told him when he flagged it, but unusual in its specificity. A meeting that Sophia had scheduled with 2 of her senior technology executives that was then quietly rescheduled twice without explanation. "Is something happening?" Logan asked her on a Thursday morning at Mercer Street. Sophia set down her coffee. "What do you mean?" "The legal query, the resource audit thing, the rescheduled meeting." He watched her. "You do this thing when you don't want to worry me. You answer the question I asked and not the one behind it." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he'd seen a few times and was still learning to read. It was the expression of someone recalibrating how much to say. "There are 2 board members," she said, "Raymond Holt and Derek Sayers. They've been skeptical of personal projects. Their language, not mine, since the previous CFO funded a side initiative that went badly." "How badly?" $40 million badly. "Okay. This is nothing like that situation. But they've started asking questions about the lab costs and about..." She paused. "About our relationship." "What about our relationship?" "Whether it's appropriate. Whether it represents a conflict of interest." Logan looked at his coffee. "Is that standard?" For a CEO investing company resources in a project connected to someone she's personally involved with. "It's not an unreasonable question." She said it flatly, the way she said things she'd clearly already argued with herself about. "I have proper documentation. The partnership agreement is solid. But they're asking it in a way that suggests the question isn't really about compliance. What's it really about?" "Control." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Holt and Sayers have been positioning for 18 months. They want a friendlier CEO, meaning one who'll give them more latitude. I haven't given them latitude." Logan was quiet for a moment. He was watching her face, the particular stillness she held when she was managing something significant without showing its full weight. "Does this put the project at risk?" he asked. "Not currently. That's not the same as no." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He sat with that. Outside the coffee shop, the street was doing its mid-morning thing. Delivery trucks, a cluster of people consulting their phones, a man walking a dog that appeared to be conducting its own investigation of a specific section of sidewalk. "What do you need from me?" Logan asked. She looked at him. He had said it practically, meaning it practically, but something in her expression shifted in a way that was not entirely practical. "Nothing right now," she said. "I'm handling it." "I know you're handling it. I'm asking what you need." She looked at her coffee for a moment. "I need you to keep the project moving. The more concrete the results, the harder it is for them to characterize this as a personal indulgence." "Okay, that I can do." He paused, then, "And the other thing." What other thing? You said they're asking about whether it's appropriate. Our relationship. He kept his voice even. Is that something we should be talking about? It was the first time either of them had referred to it directly, and the word relationship sat on the table between them with slightly more weight than he'd intended. Sophia looked at him with the directness she applied to most things. Probably, she said. At some point, he repeated. I'm not. She stopped. Started again, which was unusual for her. I'm not good at this part, the part where it's acknowledged. I've noticed. I'm aware of how I sound. You sound like someone who's out of practice, he said. It's fine. She looked at him for a long moment, and then something in her face did a thing it occasionally did. Not softened exactly, because that word implied a hardness giving way, and it wasn't that. More like something additional appeared, something underneath the precision. I had coffee with Dana yesterday, she said. She asked me how things were going. A small pause. I apparently looked less like a piece of paper than usual. That was her metric. High bar. I thought so. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable kind that had taken about 3 weeks to arrive and had been fully earned. Logan looked at her, the pen tucked behind her ear that she'd apparently forgotten, the slight shadows under her eyes that never fully went away, the way she held her coffee with both hands without seeming to realize she did it. I took Mia to the park on Sunday, he said. She asked if you were coming. Sophia looked up. What did you say? I said I'd ask. She looked at her coffee again. Next Sunday? Yeah. Okay. It was not a declaration. It was a small domestic arrangement between two people navigating something neither of them had a clean template for. But Logan felt it, the specific gravity of it, the way the ordinary logistics of life were beginning to include her without announcement. He didn't say that. He finished his coffee, and she finished hers. And they walked out into the April morning, and he went to the lab and she went to her office, and that was all. To what? Sunday came with weather that hadn't read the forecast. Warm enough, but with a wind that kept changing its mind. Mia had opinions about this. It keeps being cold, she announced, from the top of the climbing structure with the indignation of someone lodging a formal complaint. It's April, Logan said from the bench below. April is supposed to be nice. April doesn't read its own description. Sophia was sitting beside him on the bench, hands in her jacket pockets, watching Mia navigate the structure with the focused engineering intensity of a small person who had very clear ideas about the optimal route. She had arrived at the park with the slightly stiff uncertainty of someone who was not entirely sure of the social geometry of the situation, and Logan had handed her a coffee from the cart near the entrance and not made it into anything, and by the time they'd been there 20 minutes, she'd relaxed by increments he could track. She's very confident up there, Sophia said. She falls occasionally, doesn't seem to learn from it. Is that a problem? She gets back up. Mia reached the top of the structure and turned to make sure she'd been observed, caught Sophia looking, and gave a small wave that was attempting to be casual and was not. Sophia raised one hand in return. Mia seemed satisfied and began the descent. She does that, Logan said. Checks that someone's watching. Is that about me, or does she always do it? She always does it, but she was checking specifically that you were watching. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Why? Logan thought about how to say it. She doesn't have a lot of people who show up consistently, so when someone new does, she pays attention to whether they're going to keep doing it. Sophia absorbed this. She was looking at the playground rather than at him, and he couldn't see her full expression. That's a reasonable thing to pay attention to, she said. She's 6. She's very practical about it. Mia arrived at the bottom of the structure and made her way over with the controlled urgency of someone who had something to say and had been rehearsing it during the descent. Sophia, she announced, do you know how to make pancakes? I know the theory, Sophia said. Mia processed this carefully. Do you know the practice? Probably not well. Mia nodded with the air of someone who has identified a gap in the infrastructure. Daddy can teach you. He makes really good ones. He puts cinnamon in them. Is that an invitation? Sophia asked. Mia looked at Logan. Logan looked at Mia. She's asking if you want to come over for pancakes, Logan said, without fully intending to have agreed to anything,
and then realizing he had. Sophia looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and something more careful. "I want to come over for pancakes," she said.
The pancakes happened and were imperfect and very good. Sophia had been honest about the gap between theory and practice, and the first two she attempted were geometric catastrophes that Mia described generously as interesting shapes. And they ate at Logan's kitchen table on a Sunday morning with wind rattling the window and Mia providing running commentary on the relative merits of each pancake. And Logan at some point stood at the stove watching the two of them argue cheerfully about whether a star-shaped pancake was structurally superior to a round one, and felt something he was not prepared for. He turned back to the stove before his face could explain it. But it was there. He couldn't unfeel it once he'd felt it. That particular, dangerous, unwelcome warmth of understanding that someone had found their way into the part of your life that you thought you'd sealed off. Not by force or cleverness, but by just showing up. Being exactly who they were. Sitting at your table and arguing about pancake geometry with your daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't say anything. He made the next batch and brought them to the table, and the morning continued in its ordinary, irreplaceable way. That evening, after Sophia left and Mia was in bed, Logan sat at the kitchen table with the project schematics in front of him and didn't look at them. He was not someone who allowed himself to want things without examining whether wanting them was safe. He had learned that lesson in the particular way that only genuine loss can teach it. Not as a philosophy, but as something installed in the body, in the automatic reflexes that ran before thought. Sophia was not a simple thing to want. She was complex and driven and occasionally difficult, and living in a world that had approximately nothing structurally in common with his. She had enemies in her own building who were starting to make the project uncomfortable. She was learning to be present in ways she'd clearly had to unlearn efficiency around. And that learning was real, but it was also new, and new things sometimes did not hold. He knew all of that. He also knew what he'd felt at the stove, watching her and Mia over a plate of star-shaped pancakes. He didn't try to argue himself out of it. He just let it sit there, dangerous and certain and very quiet, and eventually pulled the schematics toward him and went back to work. In the board of Blackwood Group, two men named Holt and Sayers were scheduling a meeting with 3 additional members. They had begun building something careful and patient, the kind of structure that takes time to assemble and arrives all at once. Logan didn't know about it yet, neither, fully, did Sophia. But the city kept moving, and the lab kept running, and on Monday morning Logan walked in to find Priya already at the bench with a new set of results from the overnight material test, and she looked up with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Something close to excitement, carefully maintained inside professional containment. "You need to see these numbers," she said. He crossed the room and stood beside her and looked at the screen. And for a moment, despite everything that was gathering, everything still felt possible. The numbers Priya had pulled from the overnight test were better than Logan had modeled for. Not marginally better. Meaningfully better. A 7-point efficiency gain in the material interface layer that suggested the thinner configuration Sophia he had asked about wasn't just viable, but potentially optimal. Logan stood at the bench with the readout and felt the particular stillness of someone looking at something they'd been reaching toward for a long time and have finally touched. Priya watched him from the side. "You're not saying anything," she said. "I'm processing." "You've been processing for 4 minutes. It's a lot to process." She allowed this. She had her arms crossed, her own expression doing the thing it did when she was working to stay professionally measured about something that was, by any honest assessment, exciting. "The interface degradation at 1200 cycles is still a concern," she said. "We need to know what it looks like at sustained load." "I know. We run the sustained load test this week. And if it holds," Logan set the readout down. "If it holds, we have something real." He called Sophia from the lab hallway while Priya began setting up for the next sequence. The call went to voicemail, which was unusual at 9:30 in the morning. Sophia's phone was essentially an extension of her body between the hours of 7 and 7. He left a message. "Call me when you can. Good news." She called back 40 minutes later. Her voice was controlled in a way that told him something was happening on her end before she said anything informative. "How good?" she said, in place of hello. 7 points on the interface efficiency. The configuration is holding better than projected. A pause. He could hear her breathing, and behind it the faint sound of a door closing, the background noise of her office going quiet. Logan, I know. That's, if the sustained load test confirms it, I know. Another pause, this one with a different texture. This is real, she said, not quite to him. It's real. He heard her exhale once, slow. Okay. Then pulling herself back to something more practical. I need you to document everything from this morning. Time-stamped, backed up, copies with Gerald. Everything. You sound like something's happening. Document first, I'll call you tonight. She hung up, and Logan stood in the hallway with his phone and the particular unease of someone who has just heard a note in a person's voice that they don't know how to read yet. He went back into the lab and told Priya to document everything. What was happening, he found out that evening, was this. Raymond Holt had called a special board meeting for the following Thursday. Sophia told him at 9 o'clock, sitting on his couch. She'd come over after Mia was in bed, which had become an occasional thing, the kind of thing neither of them announced, but both accommodated without making it strange. She sat with her jacket off and both feet tucked under her, which was the posture she'd arrived at somewhere around week 6 of the project, and which Logan privately considered a meaningful data point about the degree to which she'd stopped performing composure in his apartment. What's the stated agenda? He asked. Project financial review. Ongoing resource allocation. She looked at the middle distance. It's legitimate in framing. Everything that happens at Holt's Hand is legitimate in framing. But the timing is not coincidental. We're 4 days from the sustained load test. If the results are what we think, there's a formal commercialization pathway opening up. The project stops being an internal experiment and starts being a licensing asset worth. Holt's people have obviously run the numbers. And they want the asset. They want control of the asset, which means control of the commercialization terms. She paused. Which means control of your IP. Logan sat with that. The kitchen lamp was on, the rest of the apartment dim, and he could hear the faint sound of Mia's white noise machine through the wall. He thought about 3 years of late nights at a folding table. He thought about Gerald's 62-page agreement and the joint approval clause he'd pushed for. The agreement protects me, he said. Your rights to the IP? Yes, absolutely. She met his eyes. What it can't protect is the project itself. If the board votes to defund it or restructure its operational standing, the agreement gives you the invention. It doesn't give you the infrastructure to bring it to market if Blackwood Group pulls out. Can they do that? If they remove me as CEO, yes. The word remove sat in the room with unexpected weight. Is that what we're talking about? Logan said. It's what Holt is building toward. He's had the votes in theory for 8 months. He's never pulled the trigger because he didn't have a specific enough justification. She picked up her coffee mug, looked at it, set it down. He has one now, or he thinks he does. The project. The project. And us. Logan looked at her. What does us give him? A narrative. CEO makes a large internal investment in a technology developed by a man she's personally involved with. No competitive bidding process. Resource allocation outside standard approval channels. She recited it with the flat precision of someone who has war-gamed an argument enough times to know it by heart. The facts are defensible. I've checked every decision against compliance requirements. But facts and narratives are different things in a board meeting. He understood that. He understood it more clearly than he wanted to. So what do we do? He said. I have 3 board members I can count on. I need 2 more. She looked at him directly. I'm working on it. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. The project, keep the project moving. If the sustained load test comes back clean, I walk into that meeting with hard evidence that this investment is commercially justified. That's the ground I can fight on. She said it with confidence. He believed her confidence. But he also noticed what she wasn't saying, that even the right ground was not guaranteed ground, and Holt had been building patiently for a long time, and patient building sometimes arrived all at once. Sophia. He waited until she looked at him. Whatever happens Thursday, this project exists. The IP is yours and mine. That doesn't go away. I know. I'm not asking you to protect my project at the cost of... I know what you're saying. Her voice went very quiet. Stop. I'm just Logan. She said it the way she occasionally said things that were finished rather than open. I'm not making decisions about this based on what's cheapest for me, okay? He looked at her for a moment. Her jaw was set and her eyes were steady, and she was, in that specific moment, exactly who she was everywhere. No performance, no softening, no management, just her. Okay, he said. She stayed another hour. They didn't talk about the board meeting again. They talked about the sustained load test parameters, about Mia's upcoming spring performance at school, about a plumbing issue in Logan's bathroom that had been making an ambiguous noise for 2 weeks. Normal things. The particular ordinary texture of two people sharing an evening. When she left, Logan locked the door and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. He had a bad feeling that he didn't know the shape of yet. The sustained load test ran for 56 hours. Logan and Priya ran it in shifts, not because it required continuous physical presence, but because neither of them was capable of being somewhere else while it was running. Logan did the overnight hours, sitting in the lab with coffee and his notes, watching the monitoring system register cycle after cycle after cycle. At hour 38, he called Sophia, who was also awake because apparently they both had the same problem with switching off. "How does it look?" she said. "Holding. Degradation curve is flatter than the worst-case model." He glanced at the numbers. "At current rate, we're looking at viable commercial longevity. How confident are you?" 80% and climbing." A pause. "Get some sleep when Priya takes over." "You get some sleep." "I will when I've finished." "Sophia." A beat. "Fine." Neither of them slept much. The test concluded on a Wednesday morning, 48 hours before the board meeting. Priya pulled the final data set, and they stood together looking at it for a long moment in silence. "There it is," Priya said quietly. "There it is." The numbers were clean, not perfect. There was a degradation uptick at cycle 800 that they'd need to understand better, a minor anomaly in the thermal variance reading at hour 40 that warranted follow-up. Real work remained. But the core performance held across the sustained run in a way that was unambiguous. The technology worked, and it worked at the projected efficiency levels, and it was scalable. Logan called Sophia immediately. She listened to the numbers and didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Send everything to me and Gerald, time-stamped. I need the full report in my hands by tonight." "I'll have it to you by 4. "Logan," she paused. "This is real. Whatever happens tomorrow, this is real and it belongs to us. Nobody can take that." He heard something in her voice that was unfamiliar. Not vulnerability exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular sound of someone who has spent a long time being certain of themselves encountering a feeling that doesn't fit neatly inside certainty. "I know," he said. "We'll be okay." He wasn't sure, saying it, whether he believed it, but he meant it as an intention rather than a prediction, which felt like the right register. Thursday arrived the way bad days sometimes do, in perfectly normal weather, with no atmospheric cooperation for the mood it delivered. Logan dropped Mia at school and went to the lab because that was the plan, and changing the plan based on anxiety was not something he allowed himself. He worked through the morning with Priya on the cycle 800 anomaly, which turned out to be a thermal measurement artifact rather than a genuine degradation issue. Good news, objectively, and tried not to watch the clock. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 2:15, Dana called him. He picked up because Dana calling his personal number on a Thursday afternoon was not routine. "Is she okay?" he said immediately. "She's fine. She's in the meeting." Dana's voice was contained in the way of someone managing their own anxiety with professional discipline. "I'm calling because you need to know something is happening." "What's happening?" Holt had a press statement prepared. It went out 40 minutes ago. I don't think he was supposed to release it until the meeting concluded, but he did it anyway. A pause. "Logan, it's bad." He stepped out of the lab into the hallway. "Tell me." It's framed as a shareholder concern. It says Sophia has been using company resources to fund a personal relationship with It calls you an undisclosed associate with unverified credentials. It implies the investment was made for personal reasons without proper oversight. Dana stopped. "It's on 3 financial news sites already. It's moving." Logan stood in the corridor and said nothing for a moment. The part about unverified credentials, he said. I know. The patents are filed. The partnership agreement is public record. I know. This isn't about facts. Dana's voice was careful. It's going to get picked up. The story has all the elements that get picked up. Billionaire CEO, personal entanglement, internal board conflict. She paused again. I thought you should know before you saw it somewhere else. He thanked her and hung up and stood in the corridor with his back against the wall. He pulled up his phone and searched. It took approximately 40 seconds to find the first article. The headline was precise in the way of something designed. Not screaming, just specific enough to be credible. Blackwood Group Board raises governance questions over CEO's undisclosed personal investment. He read 2 paragraphs. They were accurate on the facts they chose to include and silent on the facts that provided context, which was a particular kind of effective dishonesty. He called Gerald. I've seen it, Gerald said, picking up on the first ring. What's our exposure? On the IP, none. The agreement is watertight and on public record. On your reputation in the short term, Gerald paused. I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to circulate. The narrative is set up to be hard to rebut quickly because it operates on implication rather than false claim. What do we do? Right now, nothing. You don't respond, you don't issue anything, you don't talk to any journalists who are going to start calling. Gerald had the steady voice of someone who had navigated enough legal turbulence to know that the first instinct is usually wrong. You let Sophia's team handle the corporate side. Your job right now is to not make additional news. Logan hung up and stared at the wall. Priya appeared in the lab doorway. She had her phone in her hand and her expression told him she'd already seen it. I'm sorry, she said. Not about the work. About the specific ugliness of a person's professional standing being reduced to a headline. Thank you. He pushed off the wall. Let's keep working. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded and went back inside. He followed her. There was nothing else to do. Sophia called at 4:45. He was still at the lab, though the day's actual work had been largely performance, going through motions because stopping felt worse. He picked up before the second ring. Tell me, he said. Her voice was controlled, but it was the tight, effortful control of someone managing something large. The vote was 7-5. They've moved to initiate a CEO review process. What does that mean practically? It means my authority is suspended pending an audit. I retain my title officially, but all major financial decisions require co-sign from the Interim Executive Committee, which Holt chairs. A pause. The lab is frozen effective Monday. No new expenditures. The project is on hold, officially under review. She said it without flinching from it. Logan, I need you to understand that this is not the end of the project. The IP is protected. This is a delay. How long of a delay? I don't know yet. He sat down on the bench. Through the lab window, he could see the prototype on the table, the weeks of work, the precise, careful, improbable thing they'd built together. On hold. And you? He said. I'm fine. Sophia. A silence. He could hear her breathing. I've been building this company for 8 years, she said, and for the first time her voice had something ragged in it. Brief, quickly controlled, but there. 8 years. And Holt has been in that boardroom for 2, and he's... She stopped. He heard her get hold of herself. I'm fine. I'm angry, and I'm fine. You're allowed to be angry. Being allowed doesn't make it useful. It doesn't have to be useful right now. Another silence. He let it run. There are things I should have seen earlier, she said, quieter. Moves he made 6 months ago that I didn't weight heavily enough. I was focused on the project and I took my eye off. She stopped again. I don't do that. I don't miss things like that. You're human, Logan said, which I know isn't a comfort, but it's true. Humans don't run billion-dollar companies. Humans run everything. The question is whether they're honest about the cost. She didn't answer immediately. He could tell she was in her office. There was a faint ambient quality to the silence that suggested the controlled private space she inhabited at the end of hard days. There are things I need to do, she said finally. Tonight and tomorrow and this weekend. Calls I need to make. I have 3 board members who voted with me and 2 more who abstained. The abstentions are movable, I think. I need to work on them. She was pulling herself back into operational mode, which was how she processed, he'd learned. Not avoidance, movement. Okay, he said. What do you need from me? Nothing tonight. That's not what I asked. A pause. I know, she said. I'm not good at needing things from people. I've noticed. You can practice on me. Something shifted in her voice. Not quite a laugh, but adjacent to it, reluctant. You're persistent. My daughter taught me. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, the operational edge had softened by a degree. Can I come over? Later. Not to talk about any of this, just... She stopped. Yeah, Logan said without hesitation. Come over. She arrived at 8:30 after Mia was asleep. She came in and didn't say much. She sat on the couch with her shoes off and her legs pulled up and her head back, and Logan sat at the other end with his own coffee, and they watched something unremarkable on television that neither of them was actually watching. At some point, Sophia said quietly, I keep thinking about what I'm going to tell the people on my team, the ones who've been there since the beginning, the ones who stayed through the hard periods because they believed in what we were building. What are you going to tell them? The truth. That it's not over. She paused. I just need to make sure it isn't. Logan looked at her. The particular quality of her in this moment, stripped of the public calibration she wore like a second skin. She looked exhausted and precise and very real. It isn't, he said. She looked at him with an expression that was more naked than she usually allowed. And for a moment neither of them said anything, and the quiet had the weight of everything that had accumulated between them over months. The coffee shop mornings and the lab visits and the kitchen table and the star-shaped pancakes and all the ordinary, irreplaceable accumulation of 2 people becoming necessary to each other. Logan? Her voice was low. Yeah. I don't want to lose this. She said it simply. Not the project. Or not only the project. He understood what she meant. You're not going to, he said. It was not a promise he could technically keep. He knew that. But it was the truest thing he had to offer, and he meant it all the way down. She looked at him for one more moment, then looked back at the television, and they sat in the dim apartment with the city outside and the quiet in, and Logan felt the particular weight of the night, the difficulty of it, and underneath the difficulty, the stubborn, inconvenient fact of how much he cared about the woman sitting at the other end of his couch. What Holt had built was real, and it was moving, and it was going to get harder before it got better. Logan understood that. He also understood something else, something that had been settling in him for weeks and had clarified tonight into a hard, specific certainty. He was not walking away from this. Not from the project, not from what was building between them, not from any of it. He wasn't built for retreat. He'd learned that in the years after Ellen, grinding through days that offered nothing easy. You find out what you're made of not when things are going well, but when the floor drops and you have to decide whether to fall or hold. He was going to hold. Outside, the city did what it did. Inside, Sophia fell asleep on his couch sometime before 11. Not deeply, just the shallow, exhausted sleep of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 14 hours and had finally stopped. Logan got a blanket from the hall closet and put it over her without waking her, and turned off the television and sat in the kitchen with the schematics he couldn't work on but couldn't leave alone. Tomorrow there would be calls to make and damage to assess and a fight that was just beginning. Tonight he let her sleep and kept watch, and that was enough. She was gone before he woke up. The blanket was folded, not neatly, the way a hotel maid folds things, but with the specific imprecision of someone folding something in the dark, trying not to make noise. And there was a note on the kitchen table written on the back of a grocery receipt he'd left by the fruit bowl. The handwriting was angular and fast. Thank you. Don't let Mia eat the leftover pancakes for breakfast. S. Logan read it twice, then put it in his jacket pocket for reasons he didn't examine. He made Mia oatmeal and listened to a detailed account of a dream involving a horse that could speak but only in questions, and drove her to school,
and then sat in the parked car for 4 minutes doing nothing before he trusted himself to navigate traffic. The weekend that followed was the kind that looked unremarkable from the outside and felt, from the inside, like standing in a river whose current you can't see.
Sophia worked. She was always working. But this was different, a concentrated, tactical kind of effort that she described in brief calls as making contact, which meant she was spending 72 hours methodically reaching out to the people she needed to move. Logan handled the ordinary machinery of his life: Mia, groceries, a load of laundry that had achieved critical mass, and spent the hours after bedtime trying to work through the Cycle 800 anomaly in the test data because the lab was frozen, but his notebook wasn't. On Sunday evening, Sophia called and said, "Eleanor Marsh is movable." Eleanor Marsh was one of the 2 abstaining board members. 61 years old, a former CFO who had joined the Blackwood board 4 years ago and had, according to Sophia, never fully aligned herself with Holt's faction, despite several attempts at recruitment. "What does she need?" Logan asked. "Evidence. Real evidence. Not the paper compliance stuff. She wants to understand the project on its technical merits. She said if it's what I'm claiming it is, she needs to see the data herself." A pause. "She has a background in industrial engineering. She'll actually be able to read it." "Send her everything. The full test report, the efficiency documentation, the sustained load results." "I know. I already have." Another pause, shorter. "She wants to meet with you." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Me, specifically." "She said she wants to talk to the person whose name is on the patent, not the CEO who invested in it." "When?" "Tuesday. If you're willing." "I'm willing." He didn't hesitate. "Sophia, this is my project. I'll do whatever the project needs." He heard the small exhale of someone releasing a tension they'd been carrying. "Okay, Tuesday morning. I'll send you the details." He set his phone down and looked at the notebook open in front of him. Pages of calculations and diagrams that had accumulated over years of late nights. The careful record of someone building something alone in the dark. 3 years ago, he had not believed anyone would ever sit across a table from him and ask to understand it. Eleanor Marsh was going to sit across a table and ask to understand it. He pulled the notebook closer and kept working. The meeting with Eleanor Marsh happened at a coffee shop in Midtown, chosen, Logan understood, thinking it through, specifically not at Blackwood Group's offices. Neutral ground. She arrived before him, which he suspected was deliberate, and stood up when he came in with the direct, appraising manner of someone who had spent 40 years in rooms where first impressions were currency. She was lean and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a leather portfolio that she set on the table with the casual authority of someone who had been putting portfolios on tables for a very long time. "Logan Hayes," she said, shaking his hand. "Eleanor Marsh." "I know who you are," he said. "Good. Sit down. I ordered you a coffee." "Black," Sophia told me. "If that's wrong, tell the server." It was right. He sat. She opened her portfolio and looked at him directly. "I'm going to be straight with you because I don't have time for anything else. I've read your documentation, all of it. The patent filings, the partnership agreement, the test reports." She paused. "The sustained load data is remarkable." "Thank you." "That wasn't a compliment, that was an observation. Remarkable can mean a lot of things." She tapped the portfolio. "Walk me through the thermal differential mechanism. In your own words, not the documentation language." He walked her through it. He talked for 12 minutes. He knew it was 12 because he checked his watch afterward. And she listened the way Sophia listened, which was to say, without performance, following the logic rather than waiting for a pause to ask a prepared question. When he stopped, she was quiet for a moment, turning something over. "The cycle degradation at 800, she said. "Your report flags it as a measurement artifact." "We believe so, yes. The thermal variance pattern is consistent with sensor calibration drift rather than material breakdown. We need more test time to confirm." "But you're confident." "I'm sufficiently confident. I don't do certain... I'm an engineer." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not a smile, but adjacent. "Fair answer." She closed the portfolio. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "What do you think Holt is actually after?" Logan looked at her.
He took a moment, not to calculate, but because the question deserved a real answer. I think he looked at an invention with serious commercial potential and saw an asset he couldn't own under the current structure. And I think he had a long-standing play ready, and this gave him the specific justification to run it. And Sophia's judgment, her decision to invest in the project, was correct, Logan said, on the technical merits and on the compliance record. He held Eleanor's gaze. I know how the story sounds from the outside. I know what Holt's statement implied. I'm telling you that every decision Sophia made on this project was made on the basis of what the technology warranted, and you can verify every part of that. I know I can. I did. Eleanor studied him. I wanted to see how you talked about her when you weren't sure which way I was leaning. Logan said nothing. You didn't manage your answer, Eleanor said. That's worth something. She picked up her coffee. I'll be in contact with Sophia. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hayes. He rode the train back to the lab, frozen but still his, until Monday technically, and he was going to use every hour until it became officially inaccessible, and called Sophia. How did it go? She said, immediately. I don't know, she's hard to read. He paused. I think it went okay. She verified everything herself before she came in. She wasn't there to be convinced from scratch. She was there to check something. What something? Whether you were running a personal favor project or a real one. He considered. And whether I was credible without you in the room. Silence on the other end, then. What did she decide? She didn't say, but she thanked me, which I think is meaningful. He heard Sophia exhale. Okay. How's the other abstention, Weaver? Harder. He's more loyal to stability than to any person, which means he needs to believe the disruption of removing Holt's faction outweighs the disruption of keeping it. Her voice was moving through the analysis quickly, the way it moved when she was already 10 steps ahead. I'm meeting with the company's 3 largest external shareholders this week. If they issue a formal statement of concern about the board's conduct, Weaver gets cover to move. Will they? Carver Capital has been uncomfortable with Holt's expansion of board authority for 2 years. I just need to give them a concrete enough reason to say so publicly. And you have one. I'm working on having a better one. Thus a pause with a slightly different quality. There's something else. Tell me. Holt and Sayers didn't just prepare a press statement. They prepared a secondary packet. It went to 3 journalists last week, embargoed until the embargo lifts Friday. Logan waited. It's more detailed than the first statement, Sophia said. It has selectively edited versions of internal communications between you and me, things taken from project emails, time-stamped to make the personal overlap with the professional seem deliberate and undisclosed. She said it with the precise, unsparing delivery she used when she wanted to make sure something was understood completely. It's going to look worse than the first story. Logan sat down on the lab bench. How much worse? Considerably. She stopped. Then, I want to get ahead of it. I want to release a full statement before Friday. The complete picture, all the documentation, the test data, the compliance record. I want to give journalists who want the real story everything they need to write it. Okay. It means your name is in the statement. Your work, your background, your data. It makes this public in a way it hasn't been yet. I understand. You should think about it. Sophia. He kept his voice level. I said, okay, my name's on the patent. My work is in the data. It was always going to be public at some point. Let's do it on our terms before they do it on theirs. A pause. Are you sure? I'm sure. Draft the statement. Send it to me and Gerald before it goes anywhere. He heard her breathe in once, slow, and then something in her voice that he'd learned to recognize. The particular softening that happened when she had braced for resistance and not encountered it. Thank you. Stop thanking me. We're partners. The statement went out Thursday morning. Gerald had reviewed it. Logan had reviewed it. Sophia's communications team had spent 2 days constructing something that was comprehensive without being defensive, factual without being dry. A complete account of the project's origin, its compliance history, the technical results, and a clear statement of what the board process had actually involved versus what Holt's materials implied.
Attached to the statement were the full sustained load test results, independently formatted for non-specialist readers by Priya, who had not been asked but had offered and had done an excellent job. Also attached was a brief direct letter from Eleanor Marsh in her capacity as a board member, stating that she had independently reviewed the project documentation and found the governance concerns raised by Holt's faction to be unsupported by the factual record. Logan found out about Eleanor's letter when he read the statement. Sophia hadn't told him it was coming. He called her immediately. "You could have told me she'd written something," he said. "I didn't know she was going to." Sophia's voice had a quality he hadn't heard before. Not quite surprised, but recalibrated. "She sent it to me last night at 11. I asked if she wanted time to reconsider. She said no." "What made her do it?" "She said—" Sophia stopped. Then, "She said she's been on enough boards to know when something is being destroyed for the wrong reasons, and she's too old to stay quiet about it." Logan sat with that for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That's something." "Yes," Sophia said quietly. "It is." The statement moved through the financial press in the particular way that comprehensive facts move, not as fast as drama, but further and more permanently. By late afternoon, 3 journalists had filed pieces that used Sophia's documentation extensively and framed the board conflict in terms that were materially different from Holt's original narrative. One of them led with the test data, which Logan had not expected, and described the technology in a paragraph that was not technically perfect, but was accurate in its essentials and made clear that this was not a vanity project. By evening, Carver Capital had released a brief statement noting their ongoing concerns about Blackwood Group's board governance structure. It was measured and did not name anyone specifically. It did not need to. Logan was at home when he read it, Mia doing homework at the kitchen table across from him. "Daddy," Mia said without looking up from her worksheet. "You're doing the quiet face?" "What quiet face?" "The one where things are happening in your head, but you're not saying them." He looked at her. She had her tongue slightly out, the way she did when she was concentrating, and she'd gotten ink on her left hand from the pen, which she hadn't noticed. "Things are happening in my head," he confirmed. "Good things or bad things?" "Complicated things. Might be good." She nodded, satisfied with this, and went back to her worksheet. "Sophia's coming Saturday, right?" He paused. "I think so. I'll check. I want to show her the drawing I did of our building." Mia held up the worksheet to show her work, apparently deciding the homework required his verification. "Is this right?" He looked at the math problem. "Third answer is wrong. Try it again." She sighed with the weariness of someone whose intellectual contributions are chronically undervalued and went back to work. Logan called Sophia at 9. "Carver moved," she said, picking up before he spoke. "I saw. Weaver called me at 7:30. Her voice was carefully neutral, the way it went when she was managing something significant. "He wants to meet tomorrow morning." "That's good." "It might be good. It's not done." She paused. "Holt knows what's happening. He's not passive." "What does passive look like for Holt?" "Waiting." Her voice was flat. "Active looks like accelerating. He has one card he hasn't played." "What card?" "I don't know yet, which is the part I don't like." She stopped. "I've been going through everything. Every internal decision, every resource allocation, every communication I can think of. I can't find what he's holding. Maybe he doesn't have anything. Maybe the Carver statement spooked him and he's recalculating. Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. "Sophia." "Yeah." "You've been awake since when?" A pause. "Yesterday, basically." "Go to sleep." "I can't." "Can't or won't." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I genuinely cannot tell anymore." "Come here," he said. "Logan, I'm not—" "Just come here. Bring your laptop if you need it. Just stop being alone in that apartment at midnight." Silence. Long enough that he thought she was going to deflect. 45 minutes, she said. She arrived in 53, which was close enough. She had her laptop bag and the look of someone who had been running hard for a week. Not broken, nothing like broken, but with the edges showing in a way she wouldn't allow in any other context.
Logan made tea, which she didn't ask for but took, and she sat at the kitchen table and he sat across from her and she opened her laptop and went back through the internal communications again. And he looked at his notes, and they worked in the same room in silence, the way they'd found they could do. Companionable without requiring maintenance. At some point around midnight, she said without looking up from the screen, "Here." "What?" "This." She turned the laptop toward him.
She was looking at a chain of internal emails, routed through the company's project management system, time-stamped, marked with the automatic metadata of corporate communications. This exchange is between Sayers and the head of the technology licensing division. Look at the date. He looked. The date was 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks before the board meeting, 3 weeks before the public statement. The email was administrative in its language concerning the reassignment of a licensing review team to a new initiative. The new initiative had a project code he didn't recognize. "What's the project code?" he said. "That's what I can't access. It's above my clearance tier on the system." She looked at him. "Holt restructured the system permission levels 8 months ago. I didn't fight it at the time because the stated justification was about IP security." Logan read the email again. They were setting up a parallel licensing structure before the board meeting, before my authority was suspended. They were expecting to get your technology before they even made the move. He looked at her. "How long did they need to do that? Set up a parallel structure?" "Weeks, months, done properly." "Then they've been planning this since before, sir." "They were planning this while I was still in the lab." He heard how that sounded when he said it out loud, and it landed with a different weight than anything else had. Not just a corporate power play, something that had been watching the project from the beginning and waiting. Sophia's expression had gone very still. "I need to get into that system." "Can you?" "Not directly. Not anymore." She looked at him. "But I know someone who can pull the access log records without triggering a flag. She was my head of IT security for 6 years. She left the company last year." "Can you reach her tonight?" Sophia was already picking up her phone. The call was short. The former IT director, a woman named Kim, whose voice Logan could just barely hear as a firm, alert sound from across the table, even at midnight, agreed to pull what she could access through her legitimate former credentials, which had not been fully deactivated in the transition, and send it encrypted by morning. After Sophia hung up, they sat at the table for a moment. "If the licensing structure exists," she said, "and it was built before the board vote, then the governance violation runs both ways," Logan said. "Holt wasn't responding to a concern. He was executing a plan. A plan to seize technology that belongs to you, and to remove the CEO who stood in the way." They looked at each other across the kitchen table with all the accumulated weight of what the last month had been. The test results and the statement and the couch and the note on the grocery receipt and the star-shaped pancakes. And underneath all of it, the suddenly very clear shape of what they were up against. "Sophia," Logan said. "Yeah. This is going to work." She looked at him with the directness she applied to all things. "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I believe it. There's a difference." She held his gaze for a moment, and something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, but in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time, and has, incrementally, without fully planning to, allowed another person alongside it. "I know there is," she said. Kim's files arrived at 4:17 in the morning. Logan had fallen asleep in the kitchen chair, not intentionally. His head had simply made a decision without consulting him, and woke to the sound of Sophia saying his name quietly, her hand on his shoulder. "Wake up," she said. Her voice had a different quality. He was awake in 2 seconds. "What?" She turned the laptop toward him. The files were open. She had been reading for 20 minutes while he slept, and her expression was the particular controlled intensity of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for and is still processing what it means. "The project code," she said. "It's a licensing vehicle, set up 9 months ago." She pointed to the screen. "It has your invention's core technical parameters listed as the target asset. 9 months ago, Logan, before I ever met you." He read the screen. He read it again. "They've been watching the patent filings," he said, "since before the partnership." She sat back. Holt had someone monitoring emerging energy technology patents for acquisition targets. Yours came up, and then I found you first. Logan sat with the full shape of it for a moment, the strange, particular irony of it. Holt's people had been tracking the same invention that Sophia had found through a blind date and a Tuesday morning coffee habit, and the race had been between a corporate scheme and two people at a kitchen table, and the kitchen table had moved faster. Forward everything to Gerald, he said. Tonight. Already done. And to your corporate attorney. Done. Okay? He pushed back his chair and stood up. Then we have what we need. Sophia looked up at him. She had the look of someone at the end of a very long night who can see for the first time the specific shape of the path forward. Not easy, not guaranteed, but real. We have what we need, she said. He put his hand on her shoulder briefly. Not romantic, just the solid, uncomplicated weight of one person steadying another, and went to put the kettle on, because it was 4:30 in the morning, and neither of them was going back to sleep, and there was a great deal of work still ahead, and it started now. Gerald called it 7:12 in the morning, which was earlier than Gerald typically called anything, and Logan knew before he picked up that the night's work had started moving. The licensing vehicle documentation is solid, Gerald said, dispensing with hello entirely. 9 months of premeditated planning to acquire your patent outside of any legitimate purchase process. I've been on the phone with Sophia's corporate attorney since 5:30. A pause, and Logan could hear papers moving. This isn't a governance dispute anymore. This is tortious interference and potential fraud. We need to be very precise about how we proceed because this kind of evidence only works once. You use it wrong and it gets buried in procedural counterattack. What does using it right look like? Simultaneous delivery. Board members, the company's outside auditors, and the SEC filing division, all within the same hour. You don't give Holt's team time to construct a narrative around it. Gerald cleared his throat. Sophia's attorney agrees. They're coordinating the package now. Logan was standing at the kitchen window watching the early light on the building across the street. Through the wall, he could hear Mia stirring. She always woke around 7. Even on school days, she didn't want to, her body operating on a schedule her mind resented. How long until the package is ready? He said. Today. This afternoon, if the attorneys can close the gaps in the documentation chain. Do whatever it takes to close them. He hung up and stood for another moment with his phone in his hand. 4:30 in the morning felt like a long time ago. Sophia had left around 6, gone back to her apartment to shower and change and do the next set of calls from her own space, and the kitchen still held a faint trace of her presence. The tea mug on the drying rack, the legal pad she'd been using left on the table with her angular handwriting covering both sides. He picked up the legal pad and looked at it. A list of names with notes beside each one, strategic chess in her handwriting, the private architecture of how she thought. He turned it face down and went to make Mia breakfast. You look like you didn't sleep, Mia announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway. I slept a little. In a bed? In a chair. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. That's not good sleeping. No, he agreed. It's not. She climbed onto her chair and watched him move around the kitchen with the quiet attention she sometimes turned on him when she sensed something significant was happening that she hadn't been briefed on. Mia had always been perceptive in ways that occasionally startled him. She had her mother's quality of observation, the ability to read a room through details rather than announcements. Is everything okay? She asked. Logan set her orange juice in the purple cup in front of her. He sat down across from her and looked at his daughter. The gap where the adult tooth was finally starting to come through, the ink still faintly visible on her left hand from 2 nights ago, the way she was watching him with patient, serious eyes. Things have been complicated, he said. With work. Your project? My project. She wrapped both hands around the juice cup. Is it going to be okay? He thought about Gerald's voice on the phone. He thought about Kim's files and the licensing vehicle and 9 months of someone else's patient, crooked planning. He thought about Sophia leaving at 6 in the morning to go back into the fight. Yes, he said. I think it's going to be okay. Mia studied him the way she did when she was deciding whether to believe something. Then she nodded once and reached for her glass. Okay, she said, and the matter was apparently settled in whatever internal court she operated.
He took her to school and came back and sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and his own notes and the cold, bright morning light, and waited for the afternoon to arrive.
The package went out at 2:17 on a Friday. Sophia's corporate attorney delivered it simultaneously to the 5 board members who had not been part of the scheme, the company's outside audit firm, and the relevant regulatory division. Gerald sent a parallel notice to the patent office documenting the attempted misappropriation. It was precise and comprehensive, and as Gerald had said, the kind of thing that only worked once, but when it worked completely. Logan was in the lab when it went out. The lab was still officially frozen, but Priya had come in anyway. She hadn't been told to, and Logan hadn't asked. She'd simply appeared on Monday morning with her badge and her laptop, and a flat expression that dared anyone to tell her she didn't belong there. And they were going through the Cycle 800 data together, methodically ruling out possibilities, because the work did not care about corporate politics, and neither did the thermal differential physics. His phone started moving at 3 o'clock. Gerald first, then Sophia's attorney with a formal confirmation, then Sophia herself. Eleanor Marsh called an emergency session, she said. Her voice was steady, but with something underneath it, compressed energy, the way a spring sounds before it releases. 2 hours from now. Are you ready? I've been ready for 2 weeks. That's not what I asked. A beat. Yes, she said with a different quality. I'm ready. He listened to her go through the tactical picture, the votes she was confident of, the one she was still uncertain about, the procedural sequence that would need to unfold correctly. She talked through it the way she always talked through complex problems, fast, organized, with the particular clarity of someone who has processed an argument until it is clean. He listened and did not interrupt and asked 2 questions at the end, both of which she answered without defensiveness. Logan, she said, when the analysis was done. Yeah. Whatever happens in that room today, it's going to go the way it should go, he said. You have the evidence, you have Eleanor, you have Carver's statement, and you have the truth. That's not nothing. The truth loses sometimes. I know, but it wins more often than cynics think. He paused. Go, call me after. She called him at 7:45 that evening. He was on the couch with Mia, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder somewhere around 7. A school week finally catching up with her, and he answered quietly, shifting carefully so he didn't wake her. Sophia. It's done. Her voice was different, not triumphant. He'd been wrong to expect triumphant from her, more like the sound of a person setting down something very heavy that they have carried a very long distance. Holt and Sayers are out, pending investigation. The 3 other board members who were involved in the licensing vehicle have been referred to the audit committee. Eleanor has been appointed interim board chair. Logan closed his eyes for a second. The lab, he said, reopens Monday. Full reinstatement. The project resumes under the original terms. A pause. Your IP protections have been formally reaffirmed on the record by the full board. How do you feel? She was quiet for a moment. He heard her breathe. I feel like I need to sleep for approximately 100 years, she said. That's reasonable. And I feel... She stopped, started again. I feel like I owe about 30 people very sincere phone calls and possibly dinner. Another pause. And I feel like I want to see you and Mia. Mia's asleep, but come anyway. I'll wake her up. She'll forgive you. He heard something that was unmistakably a laugh. Real, chest deep, the kind that had surprised him the first time on a sidewalk in March, and had not stopped catching him since. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She arrived in 35. She knocked softly, and he opened the door, and she was standing in his hallway, in her coat with her hair slightly wrecked from what had clearly been a long and physical day, and she looked underneath the exhaustion like herself. Exactly, precisely herself, with nothing in reserve and nothing performing. He stepped back to let her in, and she came in, and he closed the door. She's on the couch, he said quietly. Sophia went to the living room doorway and looked at Mia. Still mostly asleep, one arm fallen off the cushion, her school uniform slightly rumpled. Sophia stood there for a moment, looking at her with an expression Logan had only seen a few times and had never tried to name out loud. She came back to the kitchen and sat down at the table, and he made tea without asking, and they sat together in the kitchen that had been the site of so many late nights, now that it had stopped feeling like just his kitchen and had started feeling like a place they both inhabited. "Tell me what happened in the room," Logan said. She told him. She told him the sequence, Eleanor's procedural motion, the presentation of the documentation package, Holt's attempt to reframe it as a fishing expedition into privileged internal communications, the moment when the third board member who had been involved broke from the group and acknowledged the licensing vehicle's existence, rather than continue to deny it. She told it plainly and precisely, the way she told things when she wasn't managing her audience, and he listened all the way through without interruption. When she finished, she picked up her tea and held it, and the kitchen was quiet except for the city outside and the faint sound of Mia breathing from the other room. "There are still things ahead," Sophia said. "The investigation will take months. There will be legal processes and depositions and things I can't fully predict." She looked at her mug. "The company needs rebuilding in ways that go beyond the board. The culture got corroded and I didn't see all of it, and I have to be honest about that." "You will be." "I also need to be more careful about—" She stopped. "About where I put my attention. There were things I let slide because I was focused on the project. That's a real mistake, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Logan looked at her. "You're already doing the autopsy." "I do the autopsy. It's how I don't repeat things." "I know. I'm not criticizing it." He held her gaze. "I'm just saying, give yourself one night before the autopsy starts. One night where tonight was a win, and you're allowed to just be someone who won." She looked at him for a long moment with the particular directness she reserved for things that actually mattered. "You're better at that than I am," she said. "I've had practice. 4 years of learning to take the good days when they come." Something moved through her expression. She understood what he was referencing, and she didn't look away from it. "I'm sorry you had to learn that the way you did." "Don't be. It made me someone who shows up for things." He paused. "Made me someone who was at that restaurant in March." She held his gaze for a moment more, and then she set down her tea and said very quietly, "I'm glad you were." From the living room came a small sound, Mia shifting on the couch, the preliminary stirrings of a 6-year-old surfacing from sleep. "Sophia?" Mia's voice, blurry and suspicious that something was happening without her. Sophia stood up from the table before Logan did, which he noted, and went to the doorway. "Yeah, it's me." A pause. The sound of Mia sitting up. "Did you win?" A beat. "Yeah, we won." "Good." The sound of a small person rearranging herself on a couch. "Come sit with me?" Logan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Sophia go and sit on the couch beside his daughter, who leaned into her side with the complete, unguarded trust of a child who has decided a person is safe. And Sophia's arm came around her with a naturalness that looked like it had always been there. He stayed in the doorway for a moment, not wanting to disturb it. Then he went and sat down on Mia's other side, and the three of them sat in the dim living room in the particular quiet of something that had been hard-won and was finally, temporarily, still. The investigation took 4 months. It was not clean or quick or particularly just in its pacing. These things never were. There were depositions and document productions, and 2 rounds of regulatory interviews, and a lawsuit Holt filed and then withdrew when his own counsel apparently explained to him what discovery would look like. Sayers cooperated with the audit committee in exchange for a negotiated settlement that reduced his formal liability. The third board member, a man named Garfield, who had broken ranks in the boardroom, cooperated fully and testified about the scheme's origins, which dated back 18 months to a strategy meeting Holt had convened under the auspices of a normal business development discussion. Sophia ran the company through all of it with the interim governance structure Eleanor had put in place, a more distributed decision-making architecture than the previous model, which Sophia had redesigned partly by necessity and partly, Logan suspected, because she had spent 4 months sitting with what she would do differently. She was not someone who made the same mistake twice. She was also, he had come to understand, not someone who pretended that moving forward meant the previous version had been without flaw.
The old structure worked because I trusted my own judgment, absolutely, she told him, in the kitchen during the third month of the investigation, and my judgment was mostly right. But mostly right in absolute trust is a different thing than mostly right with checks. The difference is what Holt found and exploited. So you're building the checks. I'm building the checks. She paused. It's slower. I don't love slower. I know. But it's right.
She said it with the particular cadence of someone who has genuinely worked something out rather than arrived at a convenient conclusion. Companies that survive their founders are built on structures, not on individual judgment. I've been building on individual judgment for 8 years, and it worked right up until it didn't. Logan looked at her across the table. Who told you that? Eleanor, mostly. Also Dana, in the way Dana says things where she doesn't technically say them. Dana is very good at that. She's terrifyingly good at that. The lab reopened the Monday after the board session, as promised. Logan and Priya returned to the Cycle 800 anomaly with fresh eyes and 3 weeks of accumulated theoretical work, and by the end of the second week they had confirmed it was instrument drift rather than material degradation. By the end of the month, they had a second prototype incorporating the refined interface configuration, and the efficiency numbers on the new prototype cleared 45% at differential gradients under 30 degrees, 2 points beyond the theoretical model's upper projection. Priya stood at the bench and looked at the numbers and said, with the flat composure of someone who had trained herself out of excess emotion in professional settings, this is going to change a lot of things. I know, Logan said, for a lot of people. I know. She looked at him sideways. You don't seem more excited than usual. I am, he said. It's a lot to hold. She seemed to understand this because she nodded and went back to the numbers without requiring him to explain it further. He called his mother in Portland that evening and told her. She cried, which he had expected, and then said the thing she always said. I always knew you were building something important. I just didn't know what. Which was not entirely true, and they both knew it, but it was the thing she needed to say, and he let her say it, and it was fine. Some conversations exist for their own sake rather than their factual accuracy. He called Sophia after, and she said, 45%, and then was quiet for a full 8 seconds, which was a geological age for Sophia, and then said, I'm coming over. And he said, okay, Charshisum. The formal commercialization partnership launched 6 months after the board session, under a structure Gerald and Sophia's legal team had spent 2 months building, Logan retaining clear IP ownership with joint licensing authority, Blackwood Group providing the manufacturing infrastructure and commercial network, and a revenue framework that Sophia had insisted be more favorable to Logan than standard joint venture terms, which he had argued about briefly and then accepted because arguing with Sophia about numbers when she had decided the numbers was a form of productive stubbornness that went nowhere. The first commercial pilot was in New Jersey, the underutilized facility Sophia had mentioned that first evening over the project timeline. The retrofit took 8 weeks. The pilot ran for 90 days and produced energy cost reductions of 38% for the industrial clients involved, slightly below the prototype's laboratory performance, which was expected and accounted for in the projections, and still transformative enough that 2 of the pilot clients called Logan directly to ask when full deployment would be available. He did not know how to receive those phone calls at first. He stood in his kitchen taking notes on a legal pad with the same pen he'd used for 3 years of late-night calculations, listening to the operations director of a manufacturing company in Trenton explain that they had reduced their monthly energy expenditure by $40,000. And he wrote the number down and thanked the man and hung up and stood there for a moment not entirely sure what to do with the size of it. He picked up Mia from school that afternoon and told her about it on the walk home. $40,000? She said. Every month. For one company. She walked in silence for half a block, processing. And there are lots of companies? Thousands. More silence. Then, so lots of people are going to save money. A lot of people. She thought about this with the serious, practical focus she applied to things that actually mattered. That's really good, she said. That's actually really, really good, Daddy. I know. She took his hand, which she still did at 7 going on 8. though he was beginning to suspect the window for it was closing, and filed this information away carefully in the part of himself that kept track of things he would miss. "You did that," she said, "from our kitchen table. We had help. But you started it." He looked at his daughter, the gap now entirely filled by the adult tooth that had finally arrived 2 months ago. The ink-stained fingers, a permanent feature of her existence that no amount of parental instruction seemed to resolve. The particular bright intelligence in her face that he recognized from both her mother and from some version of himself that he'd almost forgotten existed. "Yeah," he said. "I started it." The corporate war, as the financial press had taken to calling it, concluded formally in the 9th month with a regulatory finding against Holt and Sayers and the 2 remaining board members involved in the licensing scheme. The finding was civil rather than criminal, the distinction that matters more to lawyers than to ordinary people and less to ordinary people than to lawyers. But it was unambiguous in its language, a premeditated scheme to misappropriate intellectual property and remove a CEO who stood in the scheme's way. Holt's formal response was issued through counsel and was 4 sentences long and contested nothing of substance. The day the finding was published, Sophia was in back-to-back meetings until 6 in the evening, which Logan knew because Dana texted him a heads up in the afternoon. He picked up Mia from school, made dinner, helped with homework, a long division worksheet that required more patience than Logan felt he technically had, but that he produced anyway, because that was how parenting worked. You produced what was needed regardless of the internal reserves, and waited. She arrived at 7:30. She came in and sat down at the kitchen table, and Logan put food in front of her because she had almost certainly not eaten since morning. And she ate without ceremony while Mia showed her the long division worksheet with the aggressive pride of someone who had conquered a formidable enemy. "This one I got wrong," Mia said, pointing to the 3rd problem. "But I argued with Daddy about it, and he was right." "Did you admit that at the time?" Sophia asked. Eventually." "That's good enough." Sophia looked at Logan over Mia's head with a flicker of something that was private between them, and he looked back, and it was the kind of exchange that required no translation. After Mia was in bed, they sat at the table with the finding document open on Sophia's laptop. She'd already read it, probably twice, probably with annotations. But she walked him through the key sections with the methodical patience she brought to technical explanations, and he followed the legal language where it was clear and asked about it where it wasn't. "Is it over?" he asked. "The corporate piece is over." She closed the laptop. "There may be civil litigation from former shareholders who feel the board action depressed the stock. That goes through the company's legal team and doesn't require my direct involvement day to day." "And the company?" She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen lamp was on, the rest of the apartment dim, and she had that particular quality of stillness she'd arrived at over the past year. Not the controlled stillness of someone managing their exposure, but the other kind. The kind that comes from being somewhere you don't need to manage. "The company is okay," she said. "Better than okay structurally. The governance rebuild is real, and it's holding. We're going into Q4 with the commercialization revenue coming in and a board that actually functions." She paused. "I think we're going to be fine." "You sound almost surprised." "I'm not surprised." She looked at him. "I'm grateful," which is a different thing for me. He understood what she meant. Sophia was someone who had built her world on the premise that outcomes were the product of control and rigor and foresight, and gratitude, the kind that acknowledged you needed things outside yourself, had not historically fit inside that framework. The last year had rearranged the framework. He had watched it happen, incrementally, the way you watch a season change. Not in any single moment, but in the accumulated weight of many moments, until one day you look up and it is simply different. "I know," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I was thinking about something today. During the 3rd meeting, which was extremely boring and I was half present, honestly." "What were you thinking about?" "That night in March, the restaurant." She folded her hands on the table. "I had decided before I walked in that I was going to stay 45 minutes, be pleasant, and go home." "I know. You had that look when you came in." "What look?" "The one where you've already calculated the exit." She absorbed this. "And then I stayed 2 hours and 40 minutes. 2 hours and 43, I think."
Because of the carbonara. A small pause. And because you asked me what I found hard. Not challenging, hard. Logan said nothing. He remembered the question. It had come out of the natural rhythm of the conversation, not calculated, just genuinely curious. He had not understood at the time how rarely anyone had asked it. No one in my professional world asks that, she said. Because in my professional world, finding things hard is a liability. People want to know what you've accomplished and where you're going, not what costs you something to carry. She looked at the table, then back at him. You asked it like it was just a normal question. It is a normal question. Not where I spend most of my time. He looked at her. The woman who had walked into his daughter's drawing as the friend who wasn't there yet, who had learned to make catastrophically shaped pancakes, who had spent a night on his couch and folded the blanket in the dark so she wouldn't wake anyone, who had gone back into a boardroom and taken back what was hers and held the line for both of them. Sophia, he said. She looked at him. I love you. He said it the way he had finally allowed himself to say it in his own head, simply, without architecture. I'm not saying that to change anything or to start a conversation. I just wanted you to know it plainly. She held his gaze for a long moment. He watched her face do the thing it did when something real arrived. The small, involuntary lowering of the defenses she usually didn't know she was still carrying. I know, she said softly. You knew. I suspected. There's a difference. A pause. Logan? Yeah. I love you too. She said it with the deliberateness of someone saying something for the first time that they have been certain of for a while and have been waiting for the right moment to say out loud. I'm also not saying it to start a conversation. I'm saying it because it's true, and you should know it. He reached across the table and she gave him her hand, which she did not do easily. She was not, by nature, a person who gave her hand, and they sat like that in the quiet kitchen for a while, not needing to make it into more than it was. 3 years is a long time. It is also, looking backward, never as long as it felt while you were living inside it. What Logan's technology became in those 3 years was not something he had been capable of fully imagining on a folding table at midnight. It became a standard. Not immediately. These things never happen immediately. The world resists change the way it resists most things, with bureaucratic friction and incumbent interests and the natural human preference for the familiar. But the pilot results were too clear, and the cost savings too concrete for the resistance to hold. Industrial adoption came first, then commercial real estate, then municipal infrastructure projects in 3 cities. 2 years after the first New Jersey pilot, a federal energy efficiency initiative referenced the technology by name in its published framework. Priya, who had been Logan's research assistant and had become, over the course of the project, its lead technical director, presented the findings at an engineering conference in Chicago and was asked, afterward, by 17 different organizations if she was available for consulting. She was not. She was busy. Logan's name appeared in things now in ways that still occasionally startled him. Industry publications, conference programs, once on the back of a bill in a state legislature's Energy Committee report. Gerald had framed that last one and given it to him as a gift, which Logan had accepted with more genuine emotion than he expected, and had hung in the kitchen where Mia had looked at it for several seconds and said it needed to be higher on the wall. He still lived in the same apartment. Sophia had raised this, not as a pressure, just as an observation, once, in the way she raised things she'd been thinking about, directly and without preamble. You could live somewhere bigger. You could live somewhere that reflects what you've built. He had thought about it seriously, because he took her observations seriously, and then he had thought about the kitchen table and the lamp and the folding table and 3 years of late nights, and he had thought about what it meant that the place where everything started still felt like the place he needed to be. Mia grew up in this apartment, he said. She could grow up somewhere else too. She could. He paused. But the walls know things here. That matters to me. Sophia had looked at him for a moment and then said, Okay. And that had been the end of it, which was one of the things he had come to love about her. She could let something be what it was when she understood why it was that. They split time, practically speaking. She kept the penthouse,
She had actually made it marginally more inhabitable over the course of 2 years, a process that mostly involved allowing things to accumulate in it rather than curating them away, which for Sophia was a meaningful gesture. There were crayons in a drawer in the kitchen that had arrived through Mia and stayed. There was a photograph on the shelf that Logan had taken of the three of them at a beach in Cape Cod. Badly composed, Mia slightly blurry, the horizon tilted, that had replaced a piece of architect-selected art. Dana had noticed the photograph on her first visit after its installation and had said nothing, which was also a form of communication. The thing people sometimes asked Logan when he was in situations where people asked things, interviews, the occasional industry panel, a school event where the parents went around the room and said what they did, was some version of the same question. How did you keep going when no one believed in it? He had given several versions of the answer over time, and none of them were wrong exactly, but none of them were complete either. The complete answer was something like this. He had kept going because stopping felt worse, because there is a particular kind of person who is built not for the triumphant moments, but for the long middle, the years when the folding table is the whole world and the results are ambiguous and the outcome is genuinely unclear. And Logan was that kind of person, and he had learned it about himself by necessity in the years after Ellen. And the learning had not been pleasant, but it had been permanent. And the other part of the complete answer, the part he did not always say out loud in professional settings, was that he had kept going because of Mia, not in the motivational poster sense, not as an abstraction about legacy or the future. In the very specific, concrete sense that watching his daughter exist fully inside each day, without calculation, without hedging against loss, had reminded him over and over that the point was not to protect yourself from the cost of things. The point was to keep caring about them anyway. That was the whole thing. There was no other thing. Mia was 9 now, and the adult tooth was solid, and the missing gap was a memory. She had her mother's eyes and Logan's tendency to go quiet when she was working something out, and Sophia's directness when she had decided something, a quality that had appeared and deepened over 2 years in a way that Logan found both occasionally challenging and privately wonderful. She called Sophia by her name, had always called her by her name, in the instinctive logic of a child who needed to name things accurately. But she also, without announcement or ceremony, referred to the three of them in ways that did not require explanation. Our house, she said, of both places. My family, she said, when her teacher asked her to describe it. Logan had heard about the teacher's question secondhand from Sophia, who had heard it from Dana, who had been in the school for a volunteer reading program and had been present in the hallway when Mia's class came out. What exactly did she say? Logan asked. My dad and Sophia and our dog. Sophia paused. We don't have a dog. I know, she's been lobbying for one for 4 months. She's apparently incorporated it into the official family structure. She's strategic. She's 9. Where does she get that? Logan said nothing because he felt this was self-explanatory. They got the dog in November. A 3-year-old rescue mutt named Gerald, named by Mia, after Logan's lawyer, on the grounds that the lawyer was short and stubborn and had a good heart, which Logan felt was both accurate and somehow a complete sentence. Gerald the lawyer had been genuinely moved by the tribute. Gerald the dog was entirely uninterested in the honor. The 4 of them, Logan, Sophia, Mia, and the dog, walked in the park on Sunday mornings. Not every Sunday. There were weekends with work travel, board meetings, school events that reorganized the calendar. But enough Sundays that it had become a shape they returned to. The particular rhythm of Gerald running ahead and Mia narrating and Logan and Sophia walking at the pace of 2 people who have nowhere else to be. Sophia had gotten better at that, at nowhere else to be. It had taken time, and it had not happened in a straight line. There were still weeks where the company swallowed her completely, where the text messages were brief and the calls short, and he could hear in her voice the particular quality of someone operating at maximum capacity with nothing left over. He had learned not to take that personally, because he understood by now that it was not withdrawal from him, but from everything, the way a city shuts off certain services in a storm to protect the essential ones. And she had learned in those same weeks to say, I'm at capacity. I'm not gone. 3 words that mattered more than the dozen reassurances she might have manufactured instead. That was what love actually looked like, Logan had decided. Not the blind date and the first laugh and the star-shaped pancakes, though those were part of it, but the three-word text on a hard Thursday, the folded blanket in the dark, the hand across the kitchen table, the stain across all the incremental ordinariness of real time. There was a morning in the second spring, Mia at school, Gerald the dog asleep under the table, the city outside doing its constant, indifferent work, when Logan was in the kitchen going through technical documentation for a new project phase, and Sophia was at the other end of the table going through the quarterly financial report, and neither of them was talking, just working, in the same room, in the quiet that had been 4 years in the building. He looked up at some point, and she was already looking at him, and they looked at each other for a moment without any particular agenda. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He went back to the documentation. Just what?" He looked at her again. She had the pen behind her ear, as she always did, and the financial report in front of her, and the dog at her feet, and the morning light on her face, and she was exactly, precisely, completely herself. No performance, no management, just Sophia in his kitchen on a Tuesday morning like it had always been this way. "I'm glad the date ran over," he said. She looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression did the thing it occasionally did. Not softened, not performed, but opened, the particular way of a person who has learned, slowly and at real cost, to let good things be good. 2 hours and 43 minutes, she said. 2 hours and 43 minutes, he said. She smiled. Not the careful social calibration he'd seen in photographs of her, but the real one. The one that arrived without warning and involved her whole face, and went back to the financial report. He went back to his documentation. The dog snored once, shifted, and went back to sleep. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, Logan Hayes sat in his kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 9 years after the worst thing he ever survived, 4 years after a blind date he hadn't wanted to go on, and understood, with the particular hard-won clarity of someone who had been paying attention, that this was it. This was the thing. Not the invention or the licensing revenue or his name in a legislative report. This ordinary Tuesday, this specific quiet, this woman across the table who had walked into his daughter's drawing before she ever existed in his life. Some people wait their whole lives for a second chance and never recognize it when it arrives, because it doesn't arrive as a revelation. It arrives as a Tuesday morning. It arrives as a folded blanket and a grocery receipt and a very badly shaped pancake. It arrives as someone asking what you find hard and meaning the question and staying for the answer. Logan had learned that, and he held it carefully, the way you hold anything you know the value of, the way you hold anything you almost lost.